And that's really what this one is about, access control. Policy must be defined, the scope, roles, and responsibilities of groups, of personnel, and assign an individual to oversee this. So you're going to have somebody who is CJIS trained and CJIS aware on the CJIS background list that's been through all the process, identify that policy, and that could be your CJIS officer, right? The point is really to oversee the policy, make sure it's written down, and make sure that we have all agreed, right? We've trained people on it. We know how to control that access. And how it pertains to you is going to be unique in a lot of ways. What type of multi-factor, what type of things you're using would all be documented there. But making sure that you control that, you have that capability and it's built in. And then we must review it annually, just like the incident response plan. We have to go through it. We have to identify potential security incidents involving unauthorized access. And all of that, once again, can go in that same log, so that we have the capability to go back and say, this is what happened then, and here's all the information that pertains to that. So it makes the audit, part of the audit, really easy, right? Or really defined by definition. And that's really what we talk about. Should define and document the types of accounts allowed to access CJIS. So one way we can limit a lot of our controls here, or a lot of our requirements here, is by limiting the CJIS access to those who really need it and none other. Right? I did have somebody come up to me the other day and say, well, what about, the water people? Do they need to be CJIS cleared because they're delivering jugs of water into the facility, into the area where we have CJIS? The answer is no. All you have to do is make sure that person signs in and signs out and is escorted anywhere or anytime they're in the CJIS data area, right? The physical access to any of the CJIS equipment itself. So that's a requirement there. If they're going to be allowed unescorted access, then they have to go through the CJIS training. They have to be CJIS cleared. They have to do the background checks as if they were an employee. And I would suggest that is unnecessary, and it would be better to have the escort. Now, the escort has to meet all the CJIS requirements and be CJIS trained so that they can guide them through the process. That's really what access control is really at the top level. We'll talk a little bit more when you get to the physical access side. Account management. So here we're really focusing in on controlling the accounts themselves, the account creation, enabling, modification, disabling, and removal, including provisions for monitoring account usage. So in other words, we have to make sure that we know who our CJIS folks are, we know how often they're accessing CJIS, and we know if they leave, we have to disable that, in this case, within 72 hours, automatically. Within 1 day if they are no longer needed, and when they're done with that, 72 hours if we had given them emergency access for an emergency, right? Because our CJIS versus their CJIS, the officers or people dealing with an emergency come in and access our system, well, we have to make sure that after 72 hours that access is eliminated automatically. So which means we also have to have a plan to extend it should you need to, right? So make sure that you've got it, but also understand that within a week, that account is disabled, especially if it's expired, there's no longer associated with a user or an individual, violates an organization policy, or has been inactive for 90 calendar days. So if you're going to take more than 90 days off, you're going to have to get a new account. That is built into the process. So we have to update our automated controls on the account management, or we write down a policy and you sign off when you did it for X reason, so that you're logging when those changes were made. That's part of that accountability side. So the account management is now a focus area because it makes sense, right? If we're controlling those who control the accounts, and we audit ourselves on that so that we understand when it's been defined, et cetera. All right, a little bit more on the access control. Users must be required to log out, and that means that we can't share access, right? We never did, right? Because it was never allowed. But now we have to make sure that we're also logging out when the work period is completed. So at the end of their shift, they have to automatically be logged out, or required to. You say that you have to require to, maybe signing off at the end of the day when you sign out to head home, so we know it's been done and you're verifying it's been done. Sessions must be automatically terminated when a user logs out, right? So what used to happen is, in some cases, when we would close that session, we didn't log out, we just closed the exit box. Well, now we have to actually click log out of the CJIS equipment itself, or the software that accesses CJIS. So make sure that's a step. If you're going to allow them to close it, make sure the close also automatically shuts down the access, right? That works. So you're knowing that that's there. If there is evidence of a significant security or privacy risk, account must be disabled within 30 minutes of discovering threats. So somebody gets really angry, they start whatever badness, and they've been removed from the organization, right? Within 30 minutes, we have to make sure we shut down that access, right? So that they cannot come back and access stuff they shouldn't be or do bad things. Insider threat has not been a big issue in public safety, but it is still an issue. It's still there. It's just not as prevalent as it is in the rest of the world because we have, to be honest, really good people and really good organizations. And the point is not to cause harm. It's the opposite. And so we've seen that work. Limit 5 consecutive login attempts. So this used to be more open in the past. If you get 5 consecutive login attempts, should be enforced within a 15-minute period to combat credential stuffing and brute force attacks. In other words, much harder for them to guess if they only get 5 guesses in a 15-minute period, right? What happens then is then the following. In the maximum unsuccessful attempt is exceeded. Now, it doesn't say the maximum is 5. It says the maximum is 5 and 15. So it might be 10 and 30 minutes, or you can change it to be something less. I think 5 is a good number. If they failed 5 times, they've probably forgotten their passwords anyway, or their multi-factor PIN, or whatever the aspect is that they could have forgotten, they did. And so then we have to make sure that the account should be automatically locked until it is released by administrator, and that administrator has to also be a CJIS, right? That's the whole point. Policy must prohibit use of bring your own devices. Now, what we're saying is you can't use your cell phone to access the CJIS device, including mobile devices and publicly accessible systems. So in the library, you shouldn't be able to use a public system to access CJIS. I don't think that was ever a case and should never have been, but now they're mandating. Now it's pretty clear, right? For accessing, processing, storing, or transmitting of CJIS data. So you can't use your phone to take a picture of a record because then you can walk over to the CAD and input the data. Can't do that, right? Because it's still your phone that took the picture. Now, if it's a device controlled, I'm not saying any mobile devices aren't allowed. I'm just saying that your personal ones aren't, right? You can't. And that's for good reason, right? Because oftentimes those could be hacked, pre-hacked, if you will, before the event itself.